A few episodes ago, we got to check in with Tyler Goens about the discipline of reading. Well, we got him back to share about his favorite books of 2024. So take a listen and maybe you'll discover your next read or be inspired or challenged from some of the big ideas that Tyler summarizes for us. You ready? Let's jump in. Tyler, thanks for saying yes to another conversation we had. You had a conversation not too long ago about your habit as a reader. That was really fun to dive into how you pick your books and how you discipline your life as a reader and why you like to read. And one thing that I've noticed is every year, and I'd be curious to hear if you know how many years, but you usually put out like a best of every year. Your favorite books of the year. Mm-hmm. And I thought it'd be fun to 2024 just finished up, so we are at the end of January 2025, so it's still kind of fresh in your mind. I thought it'd be fun to look back with Tyler the reader at some of your favorite books from the previous year. So first of all, why do you know when you started doing that?
Probably like 2014. It's probably almost been a 10-year thing.
Wow. That's I didn't think it'd go back that far.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. So I've been back in Grants Pass for about 10 years.
Okay.
And so that's when you have a little more time to read for fun, not reading for school. And yeah, so it's probably been about 10 years of doing that. And it just helps me, even if nobody reads those blog posts, it helps me think through some of the things I read and what was most meaningful and, what can maybe speak into my life a little bit.
Why do you do that?
Well, I probably got to examine my motives, because at first maybe it was to show off what books I read and how many, you know. So that's probably always a part of the picture, just examining your motives and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, I'll often have people ask me, what's one or two good books I could read this year. Mm-hmm. And so I want to be able to help people and provide them with books that would be helpful to them or interesting, or and also books that maybe you don't need to read that one. It might not be worth your time. Yeah. I did the hard work, so you don't have to.
Here's what you need to know about it.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or some books should probably be a blog post, or a chapter. And some blog posts should probably be books.
Yeah.
But so sometimes there is maybe a filtering, where me as a pastor, I have the ability and time maybe to read things that other people don't have time to, and can maybe summarize it for them.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in. What were your favorite books of 2024? And I said, bring your top 3 or top 5. I don't know how many you got for us today.
Sure, we could do the 3. We could do the 5. And just see how this goes if you want.
Okay, so
we could do 10.
Do you want to start with your favorite? How did you organize your list? Was it in order of best to work, 1 through 10, or did you just kind of say, here are books that are great?
I think I just did my top favorite in no particular order.
Okay.
But I'll give you my favorite book, I think, or maybe the book that had the most impact on me this year. And it was called Reclaiming Conversation.
Okay.
By Sherry Turkle. Okay. Reclaiming Conversation, the Power of Talk in a Digital Age. And she's not necessarily a Christian, or I think she's a Harvard psychologist. And
can you be a Harvard psychologist and Christian?
Oh, I'm sure you could. Yeah, there's probably a few. Yeah. But I do read a lot of books that are maybe uniquely Christian or uniquely about pastoring, or But this was maybe a bigger picture view of our culture, of how technology is maybe shaping our lives, and just there were several things about it that really caught my attention.
Yeah. So why did you pick that book up? I mean, I know in our last conversation we talked about how do you get your book recommendations, but do you remember how this book came across your radar?
I do, actually. I was reading another book that I thought well, I like the book, this other book, but it didn't make my top 5.
Yeah.
And it was called, let's see here, it's by Andy Crouch. I think it was The Tech-Wise Family.
Okay.
So I was doing a lot of work on and thinking about like technology and how it's impacting our relationships. And so I was reading Andy Crouch, who helped me think through that kind of from a faith lens. But he said the best book, like better than my book, better than any book you're going to read on this, is Sherry Turkle's book, Reclaiming Conversation. I was like, well, that catches my attention. You know, when this book that I enjoyed points me to maybe its source material.
Yeah.
That really caught my attention. So that's how I found out about it.
Okay. And what were some of the big ideas that, what was the name of the author again?
Sherry Turkle.
Turkle.
Sherry Turkle. Well, one big idea was the myth of multitasking.
Okay.
Now, multitasking does not work.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that before anecdotally, like,
Sure.
you know, your brain cannot, you just do. So this is kind of going back into that, maybe diving a bit deeper into why that's a myth. Okay.
And it's something that we're all doing more than ever before now with our phones and notifications and stuff. But, you know, she kind of goes into research on why multitasking doesn't work. And she has some things here like, she says, when we think we are multitasking, our brains are actually moving quickly from one thing to the next, and our performance degrades for each new task we add to the list. Multitasking gives us a neurological high, so we think we are doing better, and when we're actually doing worse and worse. So it like kind of actually degrades real productivity. It produces anxiety. This was really interesting. Multitasking prevents empathy.
Wow. Did that make sense to you? I mean, I can think through that, and it kind of makes sense. But talk about that?
Yeah. So she says here, we've seen that not only do multitaskers have trouble deciding how to organize their time, but over time they forget how to read human emotions. So anecdotally, right, if you and I are having this conversation and I pulling out my phone and, you know, like I'm not really reading you, I'm reading my phone and I'm somewhat present with you. So, you know, we could see how that might work. But she has this really interesting, she says there's a troubling relationship between our phones and empathy. It's not surprising that in the past 20 years, we've seen a 40% decline in the markers for empathy among college students, most of it within the past 10 years. It's a trend that researchers link to the new presence of digital communications. So it makes sense if we're conversing more less face-to-face, we're not going to get as good at reading faces.
Yeah.
And so our empathy goes down as our digital communication goes up.
Okay.
Which is pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. Any other big ideas that...
Yes. Let's see here. So, you know, one of the things that the book really... I felt seen. I felt seen, and real early in the book, she was talking about in studying millennial students. She kind of noticed a repeated phrase, almost a litany. I'd rather text than talk. You'd rather text than talk on the phone. And I was like, yeah, that's me.
Yep.
I'd much rather text than talk on the phone. I hate calling people. What's up with that? Why is that? And it's generational. It's very generational. And, you know, that it kind of comes with it an anxiety about the desire to manage your time, an anxiety about spontaneity. So, you know, it was just really interesting at how maybe wanting to control or manage a conversation or say everything just right kind of created this anxiety around having conversations on the phone or even in person. She uses the example of the younger lawyers at a law firm versus the older lawyers, and the younger lawyers were all about email and texting, and the older lawyers would be taking clients out for golfing and lunches, and the older lawyers were billing way more hours. They had way more success and made the company way more money. They're way better at their jobs. than the younger clients who are all about efficiency and texting and emailing. So it was interesting to think through some of those things.
Yeah, those things are always like, I always wonder, okay, is there something that needs to be fixed? Or is it something that will kind of fix itself because eventually a new normal will be established, and whatever human beings need to kind of rehumanize that new normal will be addressed in some way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because, the Pandora's box is opened. I mean, some of these things are not going away. But here's like maybe a little dumb example where it's easier to send an email or a text, but sometimes I've found that some of those things should be in-person conversations. And maybe if I send that email that is a little bit, that could be read the wrong way, or it's more contentious, it actually turns out to be more work in the long run to try and smooth that relationship over, when I could have just popped over to their office, say a few words, and we're good. But now it's a 6-month ordeal of like...
So for someone who genuinely cares about the relationships in their life, then the work to make things more personal and not opt for what's easier might actually be the most practical as well.
Oh, totally.
And most efficient. The most efficient thing might be the face-to-face conversation. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. How did that book impact your year at all, or is it impacting you today? Or has it made you do anything different?
Right about the time I picked up the book, I was recognizing the temptation to just scroll Instagram instead of play with my daughter.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, this is not good. So I think we all of us know how much these technologies are impacting us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's definitely trying to have my phone on do not disturb more often, trying to leave it in the car, and just be a little more aware of how the phone might be impacting my relationships, my conversations, me as a pastor. And then, so to not be afraid of the difficult conversations, but to always do a difficult conversation in person, if possible. And those things usually go way better than a difficult conversation over text.
Yeah. Did you feel like she was, because I've also, so that's a problem. And then there's also sometimes like, well, the world is all, is the world more complicated? Is there more for younger workers or professionals to do? Is there a different kind of expectation? And they have a different set of tools to accomplish those things. So it's another thing to be a steward over. It's not maybe a thing to hey, don't not try to multitask, but just be mindful that it may not be giving you the thing that you're hoping it's going to give you. It's not necessarily making you more efficient or faster. Sometimes it might be required of you.
Right.
But don't kid yourself that this is actually making you it's just sometimes a thing you're just going to have to manage,
Right, especially if you don't have control over your time. Like if you have a boss or something, like there's going to be things that maybe your boss asks you to do, but maybe, if done respectfully, you could talk to your boss about, hey, here's some research on the literature. Like, do you think we could have some designated hours where we're doing more deep work? It's and maybe we're not. I don't know, some of those conversations too that could be important.
Did she have any recommendations, or was she just kind of saying, hey, I'm just reporting. I'm just presenting a thing that's interesting.
Yeah. She had a lot of recommendations. Let's see if I could pull a few. So
and what year was this written? Do you remember?
That's a good question.
Pre or post-COVID?
I think it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, okay.
It's either 2011 or 2018, but it was pre-COVID.
Because we've heard the whole loneliness epidemic a lot. So you can it's easy to see a connection between getting worse at relationships and getting more lonely.
Yes. Yeah, COVID accelerated things that were already happening.
Yeah.
So some of her recommended steps forward, take intentional breaks from digital technology. We don't have to give up our phones, she says, but we do have to use them more deliberately. And sometimes just as deliberately, we need to take a break. So a lot of people recognize that. She recommends, number 2, practice replacing multitasking with unitasking. Unitasking. Kind of a fun word. I don't know if she made it up or something, but unitasking is doing one thing at a time. When in conversation, be all there. When watching a TV show, just watch a TV show.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll watch a TV show and scroll Twitter, and I don't enjoy either.
Yeah.
So that was kind of an interesting unitasking. And then 3, slow down, protect your creativity. She says, take your time and take quiet time. Some of your most crucial conversations you'll ever have will be with yourself. So kind of slowing down and embracing those moments of boredom, discomfort, awkwardness, and pain, because those can be opportunities for that self-reflection.
Yeah.
So those are a few of her recommendations, and there were more, but those are, I think,
good.
Maybe the most, the ones that jumped out the most to me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Turkle.
Exactly.
All right, what's number 2? What's
Number
the next
2.
book you want to feature?
Let's see here. Well,
And you've printed out. Let's say you printed out your blog post.
I did.
So we'll link to that in the show notes.
Oh, thanks.
So people can kind of go through and see the other books that you have on your list.
Sure. Well, let's do John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way.
Yeah.
Practicing the Way. Be with Jesus. Become like Jesus. Do as he did. Yeah, John Mark Comer has been for me, a really helpful voice and a very influential voice. I mean, he's probably kind of the fastest growing younger Christian thinker right now.
Yeah, I've heard that book and his name. I've heard about that book a lot more recently.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, he wrote a book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, that I think really kind of put him on the map and spoke to our culture in some important ways.
So how did you get to how did you find this book? It's just because you already knew the author and you're kind of tracking with him?
Exactly. Yeah, okay. I've followed his ministry for maybe 7 years now. And he was a pastor in Portland, so it feels local too. I think he even has some experience in Southern Oregon.
Yeah.
Which is funny. Small world. Yeah. Because now he's probably, I don't know, millions of people reading his books now.
He's a big deal.
Yeah.
In the best way possible.
Yeah. Totally. And this book, if you followed his ministry, there's not a lot in this book that's new or novel necessarily, but it's just the perfect encapsulation of what I think God's put on his heart and his contribution to the church of what does it look like to follow Jesus together, and the spiritual formation movement, to kind of take the best from that and translate Dallas Willard, who would be like a theologian or a thinker who's kind of hard to read and understand, and to almost kind of translate Dallas Willard and some of those thinkers into a book that maybe a lot more Christians like me could understand.
Yeah. So what are some of the big ideas from Practicing the Way?
One of them
is it just the tagline, be like Jesus?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny because some of this stuff's so simple. All right, following Jesus, be with Jesus, be like him, do what he did.
Yeah.
Probably the first main takeaway with the idea of following Jesus, becoming like Jesus, is that spiritual formation, that everyone is undergoing spiritual formation. Every person in the world is being formed in one way or another. We're all constantly being shaped, molded, transformed, conformed to something, to someone. We're not isolated individuals. We're all being worked on by the outside and by the inside, and by our relationships and family of origin and our biology. All of that comes together to form us into a certain kind of person. And so, the question is not, am I being spiritually formed? It's, it's who you are, and how are you being formed?
Yeah.
And so the book kind of points it out that all of us are being shaped by so much around us. But maybe an intentional Christian spiritual formation is to be intentional about how we're being shaped.
Yeah.
Not in a way that we can control or manipulate, because so much we can't. It's more an organic metaphor, maybe more like a fruit tree than Amazon Prime. That it's slow, but we can do things, fertilize the soil and prune the branches and these sorts of things, these sorts of metaphors to grow in our faith.
What are some, two questions. One was the planned one of, are there any quotes that you'd want to bring forth? But also I'm curious, like, why is this a big, why am I hearing this book mentioned more often? And why is John Mark Comer becoming more of an influential author, writer, speaker, thinker?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I kind of wonder if the spiritual formation movement, which is something that John Mark is probably at the forefront of right now, popularizing that movement, is a reaction to a kind of Christianity that was overly intellectual, doctrinal, very much about thinking the right things, but not really focused on like how we should live our lives and kind of what this looks like in normal everyday life. Along with that, there's, I think, a movement in our culture towards habits. Like, a lot of people in our culture are talking about that.
Atomic Habits was a good book.
Lots of conversations about habits and how they shape our lives. So there's some in the water, in the culture, where habits are important. I think maybe a worldly perspective on habits would be for self-optimization and my best life now. But from a Christian perspective, our habits or spiritual practices are to make us more like Jesus and a more loving person towards those around us. So yeah, why are you hearing his name more? He's an incredible communicator. And I think he does speak to our cultural, kind of where our culture's at. And to a church culture that might have been overly focused on doctrine, to the exclusion of practice, how this is lived out.
And even there's been a lot of kind of high-profile moral failures within the Christian world, like from pastors, and maybe there's a hunger for what else is there, that can kind of connect me to something real, something spiritual.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Can't count on these guys, or or maybe they're missing something, or how do I make sure I don't take that boat, that they took? And is there more to Jesus, more to faith than? I wonder. It'd be easy to kind of write off Christianity as just being that apparently that's what it's about, and people are like, well, that must be. Anyway,
I'm glad you brought that up. It makes me think of. So think of a scenario. We've all known people who know the Bible really, really well,
right,
and do not resemble Jesus really well. They don't look like Jesus, and I probably resemble that sometimes too. And I think that's another part of maybe his appeal, and just that you could be very knowledgeable about the faith, but not be very much like Jesus. Like that's not good, How come some of the people who do the most for Jesus look the least like him? So that might be another part of the appeal.
And from interesting too, like the little bit I know of church history, there's a rhythm to these movements come around, and of I think specifically in the pietists and who saw the Lutheran state church of their day just become very much about very intellectual, very and then it's like, well, what if Jesus makes a difference to how we, bank? What if Jesus makes a difference to how we plant a garden? That's kind of cool.
Interesting, huh?
Any quotes from John Mark Comer from Practicing the Way that you'd want to share?
I don't know if I have any with us, but I mean, just really valuable. Am I being formed into the person of Jesus? But yeah, no specific quotes.
And has it impacted your life? Have you seen yourself changed as a result of reading this book, or any new ideas come into your life from that you're finding a place for, weaving in?
Sure. You know, it's funny how, and like you said, the church often goes in waves and movements and pendulum swings. Like, I'm in a season right now where the basics are meaning a lot more to me.
Yeah.
Like, be with Jesus. That's pretty basic, I would think,
Yeah.
right? But like, oh man, that's hard. To just slow down and spend some time with Jesus and not be addicted to productivity and what needs to be done next. And so some of that is that these things maybe I've heard my whole life, but maybe it's the way John Mark says it in a fresh way, or maybe I'm just in a place of life where, okay, like I'm a dad now, and so things just hit you a little differently. So it's funny, maybe a renewal of some of the basics that maybe aren't basics. Maybe they're the fundamental building blocks, the realities that anchor our lives.
Yeah. All right, what's book number 3 that you want to share?
Book number 3, let's do Just Show Up, How Small Acts of Faithfulness Change Everything, a guide for exhausted Christians.
Whoa. Who's that
That's
by?
kind of a long title. Drew Dick.
Is that 2 names, first and last name?
Mm-hmm. Yep. D-Y-C-K. Drew D-Y-C-K.
Okay.
I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Just Show Up, How Small Acts of Faithfulness Change Everything, a guide for exhausted Christians. And I think this one especially speaks to like us millennials who were told we need to change the world. And maybe especially Christian millennials. There's very much, and some of these figures I benefited from, your David Platts or your Francis Chan's, where it's just very much about like, go hard for God, like go to the nation, John Piper, go to the nations, change the world, do great things for God. And this guy and his wife at some point, like in their, 30s or 40s, as they've got kids and life is crazy, and there's a disillusionment that hits. And you also wonder, like, am I a bad Christian because I can't accomplish these great things or whatever? So he says, at some point, we all become exhausted Christians where our, quote, youthful idealism crashes on the hard rocks of reality. Like having kids or getting old, which can be extremely disappointing or even guilt-inducing. But that limitation then becomes an invitation to just show up.
Yeah.
And to just be there. I can't change the world. I might not even be 100% there, but I can be there consistently.
How did you find this book?
Probably on Twitter. I heard about it on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. But I read about it in a blog post. Yeah, in a blog post from Mere Orthodoxy. It's kind of an organization that does blog posts. And I was like, oh wow, that seems. Yeah, there's lots of literature on do amazing things for God, but just show up. It was like, oh, I think I can do that.
Yeah,
I think I can accomplish that.
And have you seen that? Change the way that you think about the expectations that you have of yourself or others have of you. And I guess in the midst of that, I forgot to ask what are some of the big ideas. The title says a lot.
It does, doesn't
it?
it?
The quote that you gave us gives us a good sense of it. But I get just maybe there's meaning. It's meaningful to just continue to be a presence, even if you're not being spectacular.
Yeah.
Maybe or
no, I think so. Yeah, I mean, he says God doesn't call us to change the world. He calls us to small acts of ordinary faithfulness. And, he says when I was younger, that would have, I would have been discouraged by that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, just small acts of ordinary faithfulness?
Kind of felt like selling out.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. How boring,
Yeah.
And I remember, too, being a teenager and looking at middle-aged folks doing a normal, boring life and going, oh, well, it just seems subpar, it seems JV,
Yeah.
The Christians that were being highlighted to me were that crazy missionaries, you know. But yeah, you know, his idea was almost kind of the reality of our finitude, our limitations, that we're creatures, and you know that there's a difference between sin and finitude, a difference between sin and just human limitation.
So you're the fact that you are finite doesn't, like, when your finitude starts to show, doesn't necessarily mean you are in sin or
Exactly.
or failing.
Yes, yeah, well said.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and how that, I think maybe when we're younger, our finitude, you know, we think is a flaw, but it can actually be a gift.
Yeah.
A great gift where we realize, oh, I'm not God. I'm not in control. I just, you know, need to do a few things well, or maybe not even well. Just do a few things that God's called me to.
Someone said, some hero of the Christian faith, said something like, attempt great things for God. Does that sound?
Yeah, who was that? I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Somebody.
Yes.
So, is there a difference between attempting great things for God and sort of submitting to your finitude, or is that one of the great things that you do? Your attempt for God is saying, I'm gonna actually just turn the volume down on expectations, or what those
Yes.
and I'm gonna just show up, and that is gonna be the great thing that I do for God. Or do you feel like maybe maybe there's a, well, no, sometimes you might be called to take the mountain, but you know, that's once in a while, and most of the time, that's the great thing. Most of the time, it's just the small acts that's running up, you know? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, God gives each of us different gifts and entrusts different levels of influence to us. I've been thinking recently about some of these maybe great heroes of evangelical faith in the United States, and like how you know. So I'm thinking of like A.W. Tozer or A.B. Simpson, who accomplished a lot for God, but their families got neglected.
Yeah.
And like their spouse didn't feel loved by them.
Right.
So things like that were, oh man, I think some of evangelical Protestantism in America needs to think through the problem of ambition. And there is sacrifice, I think, sometimes for but there's a big difference between like sacrificing your family and then sacrificing as a family. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's like I do think, I mean, I want to do great things for God. I think we all do, but I think the legacy that usually outlives you is usually your kids, the people that you impacted. And, you know, you look at Jesus' life and his, you know, primary, like, it seems like he had the most impact on a small group of people.
Yeah.
The crowds came and went, but, you know, those 12 guys, or 11, changed the world.
Yeah. That's, yeah. It almost, I can see a thread weaving through these books, right? Because I was just thinking about, let's say you want to do great things for God. I'm thinking back to our first book about just the, try not to multitask. And you think about Jesus' model, or that spending more time with a smaller amount of people when you have the capacity for larger influence, but choosing instead to do that actually might be the best, most efficient way to make a big thing happen. You know? So you might actually get what you want in a more efficient way by unitasking and just showing up, changing what, you know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I forgot to ask you along the way, who would you recommend these books for? Do you know anything about the, or, if someone's thinking like, should I read that book? Or having listened to this conversation, I've kind of gotten what there is to get from these books. I don't know, any of these. I'm guessing you recommend all three, but any particular audiences come to mind when you think about like the myth of multitasking, the reclaiming conversation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny is a lot of these books are going to speak uniquely to me or people in my stage of life. But yeah, I think Just Show Up, really good for like new parents or, people that are kind of entering into new phases of life. Or you're getting married, or maybe you're just a little burnout.
Yeah.
So that's I think helpful for those maybe entering into not necessarily middle age, but middle life.
Sure.
With the more boring stuff maybe. Changing diapers and practicing the way. Yeah, I mean I think I would recommend that to any Christian. It's super helpful. The myth of or the reclaiming conversation is a little bit harder to read, but it's also, for anyone wanting to think through how technology is impacting our relationships, it's a must read.
Yeah.
For anyone interested in that.
Yeah. I know that you have a lot more books on your list. Is there an honorable mention or any other that you just would like to kind of like throw out there because it's just too good not to?
Sure. Let's see. Let's do, maybe if we do this last one, really, and I listened to this one, so I won't necessarily have any quotes readily available, but it was Henry Nouwen, The Return of the Prodigal Son, a meditation on fathers, brothers, and sons. And I think this was his most popular book. If people know who that is. Henry Nouwen, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And yeah, three things are happening in this book that kind of all weave together. One would be Rembrandt's famous painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son. Okay. So if anyone's listening, they could just Google it, unless you're driving. Okay. Then don't do that.
Don't multitask now.
Don't multitask. Yeah. It's that picture of, you can look at it there if you want to. But
it's on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Okay. And it shows a kind of an older gentleman with a beard. His son is in front of him, kind of kneeling down in front of him and kind of leaning into his father's bosom, and his father just kind of just holding him.
Just embracing him.
Yeah.
So really powerful painting on the prodigal son story by Rembrandt. So Henry Nouwen saw this painting, and it just like changed his life. He somehow got private access to actually look at the painting itself, and stared at it all day. And it was kind of revealing some deep like father wounds that he had. But so, as he unpacks and studies this painting, he starts to think a lot about his relationship with his father. And then the prodigal son story, Jesus' most famous story, kind of how all these three things intersect.
The painting, his own story, and then Jesus' parable about the prodigal son.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And yeah, it's really moving. He has this great quote in another book where he says, that which is most personal is often most universal. So like the deeper I go down into my own issues, flaws, problems, the more you would think, oh, that's uniquely Tyler, but probably it's more likely the deeper I go into me, I'm going to better understand you. Yeah. And that which is most personal is often most universal. So as he drills down into his stuff, it's very relevant to the rest of us and where we're at. And he goes character by character and kind of sees himself like in the younger brother of Jesus' story. Then he sees himself in the older brother, right? The resentment, the legalism, the frustration. Then he looks at the father and goes, "Oh, that's who I'm supposed to become like."
Interesting.
The open-armed, and so anyway, it was a really, really good book, and Jesus' story of the prodigal son is worth infinite meditation, because so many layers of depth and meaning, and I think it's like 300 words in Greek. It takes just a couple minutes to read, but it's the greatest story of all time.
Wow. How did you find this book? Just because are you a follower of this author?
I have read a few of his books, and I like Henry Nouwen.
He's since passed. I understand.
Yes.
Kind of
I read that from a Rod Dreher blog post. Which is funny because Rod Dreher is a Christian author, and he had some issues with his dad. I mean, probably all of us. Who of us has a perfect father, right?
Yeah.
So all of us can resonate with that. With what our earthly father was not able to give us.
Yeah.
And so I think I heard about it from from Rod Dreher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And who would you, does this yield any personal takeaways or changes for you? And who would you recommend this book to?
I think the thing that like really struck me the most was him talking about the older brother. And I think I've always resonated more with the older brother in the story.
Are you an older brother?
I am the firstborn.
There we go.
So I am the older brother. And
yeah, me too.
Okay, yeah. And I think I have a lot of older brother tendencies. Like I never I'm a pastor's kid, but I never had the rebellion period.
Yep.
I struggled with the church sins, legalism, pride, self-righteousness, thinking I was better than other people.
Yeah.
Critical, cynical.
Yeah, and judgment over like, why does that dude get the party?
Yeah, totally.
A little bit. Yeah.
Well, yeah, why don't I get a party?
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think I think Tim Keller had a similar book called The Prodigal God. And he does some work on the older brother too that is just really good for religious people, I think, or people who've been brought up in the church so yeah. Are you a religious person like me? Check this book out.
Yeah.
Are you cranky and critical? Check this book out.
Interesting. I wonder, especially as the church continues to change,
Yeah.
and the people who are making up the church of today and who will make up the church of tomorrow are going to do some things different than the church of yesterday, So anybody who's still here from the church of yesterday that's tough.
Sure.
Tough to see, especially if the new things are doing well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not an artwork guy, but watching him just meditate for hours on this painting, it kind of, I pulled it up on my computer and was just looking at this painting, and it's amazing. The detail and the, so just one little detail is really cool. The father's hands, one hand is more masculine and one hand is more feminine.
Oh, wow.
And so even in the father himself, like there's kind of the more motherly, nurturing side, and then just like the masculine, protective, there's just some levels of detail in this painting. And Rembrandt himself painted this near the end of his life as he had been humbled, bankrupt. So you kind of see even a humility and he had been brought to his knees. So he really resonated with the guy in the prodigal son as well. So anyway, this paying attention to artwork is not what I've done before, but
yeah,
it was interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so 2025. You got your stack already on your nightstand?
Some of these ones too. So the ones I haven't read.
Okay.
Working through some books.
You want to name drop like ones that you're like most excited about, ones that like I'm not so sure about it, but it's there, and I don't.
Yeah, I'm having some fun reading a book on President Lyndon Johnson's life.
Okay.
And so doing a little more like history, and that's just more for fun, or I'm pretty fascinated by history. One of my runners up was a book on Prohibition.
Okay.
I'd always wanted to read a little bit more about what the heck was up. We outlawed alcohol for like 10 years in this country.
Right.
How did that happen? What did that look like?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'm pretty fascinated by history, American history. What else?
Any ones that you're like, I don't know, like what? I mean, I don't know, like ones that you're kind of skeptical about, but they're in your stack anyway?
It's a good question. Kind of all these. I mean, all these, the stack we're looking at, it's funny because there's books I want to read, and then there's books that like you feel like you should read, or well, people are talking about it, but it's probably a good discipline to know like when to not finish a book.
Yeah.
Like, because it's time. It's time, and there's so many good books. Like, well, if you're not really connecting with this one, there's times to probably push through and finish something that's hard. But there's probably other times where it's like, oh, maybe I can just put this down and it's okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your reflections.
No, thanks, Josh.
And maybe we'll check in again. Maybe we'll have to get the 2025 best of. Yeah. In a year from now. It'd be kind of fun. So.
It would be.
All right. Catch you later, Tyler.